Do you have any nuggets that you would like to drop?
No, I'm not going to drop a nugget. You don't want to see that.
No, I don't. Welcome back.
We're on an adventure.
We are.
Can you guess where we are? That rock thing behind us? Some of you might know it.
Today we're here to share with you about how to create a house sitting routine that works for you.
Probably one of the most important things, because if you're going into house sitting as a profession, semi-profession, you're gonna have to figure out how this dovetails with your life and your normal routine, because if you don't, with what we've experienced, particularly in the early days, it can really throw things out and it can make it quite challenging to meet your current obligations. I think this really for me breaks down into 3 key areas, Chris. It's before the sit, during the sit, and preparing to leave the sit, bordering after the sit. With what we've discussed around before the sit, and I suppose we'll look at this from 2 perspectives. Let's look at it as prior to the van and now that we've got the van, because they're 2 very different ways in which we do our house sitting now. First, we'll look at before the van. With how we're doing our house sitting, what would you say were the key things that we need to make sure that we did in our approach to make sure that the routine was maintained and worked for us?
Planning was definitely numero uno. We spent a lot of time deciding location, length of stay, which we were happy to accept, and the type of animals that we were happy to work with. Now, that changed over time as we learned different behaviors of different breeds of animals, and we became a little bit more selective over time based on our experience. Then for me, the next step after making the application and obviously understanding your schedule was very much around communication and setting boundaries. So Matt, in your experience, what were some of the things that you found challenging prior to setting good boundaries and what we learned from those experiences?
We had some pet parents or homeowners that didn't really, to us, and this is our, I suppose, lens on the world at this time, they didn't respect our time and the fact that we had other commitments. We had some situations where we had booked in with them at a time that worked for them to do the handover and had said, look, we can take 15 minutes to half an hour as a morning tea break, but it's a work day for us. So we need to make sure that we're back and online working, doing what we need to do. We had a couple of those situations, one in particular where they took 2 hours and waffled on about a lot of different things that were not related to what we needed to do to look after the property or the cat. Lovely people, lovely home, lovely cat, but it sounds harsh to say, the disrespect for our routine and our time was something that I felt really cut into our workday. And it put me in a position where I felt like I was failing in my obligations to the team that I was supporting and the employer that I'm working with. So that was probably one of the biggest things. So setting those boundaries and letting them know that this is what we need in order to be able to help you. So if we can't get what we need, then we can't help you effectively. Interestingly, when we went back and we did the second sit with them, we set those boundaries very clearly again, and we went out and worked in the van instead of setting up and trying to work at the dining room table inside the house with them, because we'd learned from that previous experience that we need to actually have physical boundaries there too. What stands out for you?
With regards to that particular experience, and I think that's a good example, the second time around, the difference, so to give you perspective, we'd had a conversation with them before we met them in person to do the handover, and we'd set the boundaries at that point in time. But then when we met with them face to face, that those boundaries hadn't been reinforced that first time around. From that experience, we learned that, especially with this couple, it's different with different people, but you need to, I guess, figure out for yourself and work on your routine and what's going to work for you. For us, the second time around, when we got to meeting them face to face for the handover, before we even got into conversation, we were very clear straight away. We're on our lunch break, we only have half an hour, and that made it easier. They still tried to push the boundaries out, but once I'd also set an alarm and said to them, I've actually got a meeting. So that made it very clear to them, I've got half an hour, I have a meeting to get to, and it was very clear to to them that they couldn't push those boundaries, I suppose. So we've had other instances where it's been so different. As an example, we went to one house where we were looking after a couple of cats, and they literally just high-fived us, gave us the keys and said, see you in a week. So you're going to get a lot of different people, and as Matt says, read the room.
On the back of what Chris has shared there in relation to having meetings and other obligations during the day, you really want to try and plan for your handover or your meet and greets to be at a time that works for you, because if you have got other employment related obligations or other things that you need to make sure that you're available for, having a handover or a meet and greet for a house sit that cuts into those really isn't going to help you, and it's not going to help them either.
I think something to consider here is we're obviously speaking from our perspective. We're still working 5 days full-time a week and 5 days a week full-time. And so for us, we need to be really mindful, even though we work remotely, we're still employed. If you have to go into an office and you're doing house sitting to supplement in some way, or you're supporting your neighborhood, then obviously you're not going to go too far away from your office for starters. But I think it's unlikely that you would take the time in your lunch break to drive to somewhere to do a handover at lunch and then drive back to work to continue your day. That's cutting in too much. And for us, our time is money and it's precious. So I would totally understand that that may not work for you. But if evenings and weekends work better and you are working while you're house sitting, that's obviously a different bucket than if you're traveling internationally and you're coming to a country and doing house sitting as a supplement while you're traveling. Then obviously it just depends on when you want to have those engagements, availability, when you wake up, obviously the homeowner's availability. You need to make the routine work for you is essentially what we're trying to say here.
So that set of boundaries, routine, framework was consistent regardless of whether we were in the van or whether we had the Swift, outside of the whole working from the dining room table side of things, because we've got the office set up in the van now. We now need to look at, during the sit, how do you maintain a routine that works for you now that you've got other things to take care of that aren't normally a part of your world, such as someone's animal, their plants, and maybe there's some other day-to-day chore related things that need to be done with the sit. For example, when we were looking after the property in Mapleton with the fire and flood management.
There's aspects of doing some of these sits which I quite enjoy when we're working, because it helps to break the cycle and give us a break from our work day. So as Matt was just explaining about that property in Mapleton, going for a walk around the property at lunchtime was a really good way for us to disconnect from our work for a little bit and give ourselves some time to refresh before getting back into work. I think when it comes to your routine while you're at a house sit, and this is just speaking from our experience, obviously everyone's going to be a little bit different with this, and I'll speak to the before the van and after the van experience because they are very different. Before we had the van, we were getting around in a Suzuki Swift, which is quite a small vehicle if you're not familiar with it. Everything that we owned was in the Suzuki Swift, and we had 3 buckets which contained food and all the stuff. So we were having to cart everything out of the car and bring it into the house. And I mean, that was our choice. But looking back, there's probably much easier ways of doing things.
We were traveling with, as Chris said, there were 45-litre black buckets with lids, and one of them was full of condiments, spices,
Beans.
broad cooking related ingredients, flour, sugar, beans, whatever it might be. We were talking not canned beans, like dried packs of beans as well that we still had left over after Coco Roro. And there's quite a bit that we needed to make sure that worked for us in relation to moving in and moving out of the property from a routine point of view. Predominantly where you've got animals that you need to make sure don't flee when the door is open and escape. So that move in, move out process was something that we needed to do at times when it fit into our day, and it was also practical for what was going on at the property. What about, given that we're on the topic of food, and it's a little bit different now with the van compared to what it was with the Swift, how do the house sits differ for us now from a planning routine food point of view compared to when we were in the Swift?
I feel like our old routine, although it worked for us at the time, I think that because of how we were living in the Suzuki Swift, we didn't have anywhere to store food while we were on the road.
No fridge.
And so we were still very much buying groceries, cooking food in the property. But then once we left that house, we were getting lots of takeaways and eating out. And so that, from a health perspective, in my opinion, may not have been the best of decisions. Whereas now that we have the van and we have our fridge and freezer, we use the opportunities for the house sitting to really get all of our day-to-day stuff done. So we do our laundry, we do our maintenance. Matt likes to colour his beard. And I have all my beauty routines. And more importantly is our food prep. So we will plan while we're at the house sit. We'll look at what they have and how easy it is to use the equipment that is provided for us. And we will do batch cooks. And the purpose for this is because nowadays we're trying to supplement our house sitting with our travels. And so when we are house sitting, we will do big batch cooks and then freeze a lot of the stuff so that when we're on the road, it's all ready to go. It's just a matter of taking it out of the freezer and defrosting and cooking it.
So now we're operating with a 90-litre fridge freezer, whereas before we didn't have any of that. Previously, what we would be doing is looking at the house set and how much food we had, and we'd be planning the runway for our departure and figuring out what sort of perishable foods have we got that we need to make sure that we've consumed or that are ready to be used as a meal immediately in the next day, so that we didn't have the wastage from the food that we had bought. So our grocery shopping routine had changed a fair bit. Now it's much more relaxed, I suppose. We don't need to look at it and try and whittle down and make a meal out of the last 3 ingredients in the fridge. We're able to load things into the fridge freezer that we've got. So as Chris said, the house sits now for us, given that we've got the van, really are more of a base to set up and knock over a few things, look after someone's animal while we're there on their property, explore that local area, but really it's an opportunity for us to stock back up, give the van a good clean and make sure we're ready for the next leg of the adventure.
And have a bit of a base for a while, because we can be on the road for some time between sits now.
It is nice to have that little bit of a, we're here for a week or 4, but you do get itchy feet after a little while.
Yes, that is so true. We have noticed since we've been house sitting, if we're anywhere for a length of time, we're ready to go. It's quite comical because I remember when we first started house sitting, we were trying really hard to get the long house sits in the hopes that it would ground us and we could have a good routine and feel stable. Whereas now I feel
A
like
week is a long time.
we get to the end of the week and we're just about ready to go somewhere else because we're just always on the move. And it's just a totally different way of living.
So back to the routine aspect and how to develop a good house sitting routine that works for you. If we are looking beyond the food prep, the grocery accumulation side of things, how else do you see the routine fitting in for us now and even previously with the Swift during the set? What's the biggest takeaway?
Because our work with us working remotely takes up such a huge amount of our time, making sure that we are set up for our work day and we're comfortable, I think it creates the basis for our entire routine. And so for me, that's probably one of the more important things. What about you?
I think there's a combination of the setup from a productivity and an ergonomics. Sorry about the flies. The sun's coming over the top of Uluru at the moment, and we are, for those of you who didn't know where we were, that's where we're at, and the flies are starting to creep into this area now because it's warming up. So anyhow, it's largely about the ergonomics and the productivity that's achieved through being able to make sure the setup is the right kind of configuration, but also it's about the internet connection as well. And this is one of those things, like, how do you deal with an internet problem if you're at a house sit? We had one in Craffers in South Australia, just outside of Adelaide, and the internet was horrible. So we had to drive 20 minutes away from the house set towards the city to then be able to use our mobile data. The house internet was horrendous. Our mobile data didn't work there. Starlink was unreliable there. It was just not helping us. So our routine during that house set had to change from what our routine normally would be, which is get up, feed the pets, do whatever you need to do, log on and get the workday started to get up, feed the pets, jump in the van, take off down to wherever we need to go so we can get a connection and work. We'll talk more about how you can troubleshoot some of those house sitting, internet connectivity related issues in the next video. Keep your eyes peeled for that one. In fact, like, share and subscribe and hit the bell notification button there, because when we do drop that one, if you're trying to find out how do I get past all of these challenges, we've got some juicy tips for you to come up there.
Okay, let's talk about when we're wrapping up a house sit. What is the routine that we have that makes sure that, one, we're on schedule and on time, and two, the place is looking spick and span for when the owners come home?
Well, first up, we like to make sure that we know what the arrival and departure times are for the homeowners, or more so the departure time and the arrival time. So when are they leaving and when do they come back? So we can make sure we're there on time, and we can make sure that we're out of the house without them feeling like they need to entertain us. If you've had a long flight, you know what it's like. You don't want to have to entertain some stranger who's just been looking after your home and just sort of look around, whatever. You just want to drop back into your space. So for us, I think there's a couple of things that that will temper the answer to this question, and it's going to predominantly be, when do they come home? What time of the day, what day of the week, and what obligations do I have that may be at or around that time. So if they're coming home on a weekday morning at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, that's when I'm really needing to be ready to go as far as logging on with work and being able to support the team I'm working with. So what we need to make sure that we do is that we've got the house in a state where it's been cleaned the afternoon or evening before, and as much of our cleaning for our clothes and whatever we've got has been done in advance as well. We would make sure that the day before the owner returns, that we've done all of our laundry, that's all been washed and dried and packed away. So we're ready to grab a bag and go pretty much. And the very next morning, first thing, it's a case of grab the bedding, grab the linen, towels, chuck them in the wash, put them in the dryer, do whatever we need to do. If they're coming home at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, we're up at 5. And that's to make sure that we can strip the beds, have a shower, wash everything, dry it, remake the beds, and do all that sort of stuff. If they don't have a tumble dryer, then it's going on the line and we're not remaking the beds unless there's replacement linen there to use. But typically that's the sort of stuff that we need to think about 3-4 steps in advance of where we are and where we need to be.
More recently, since getting the van, what we've chosen to do particularly when we have those early morning exits, is that we tend to do our laundry and the linen wash the day before, and we will sleep in our van that night, and then we'll just come in the next morning, do our morning routine, shower, brush teeth and all that sort of stuff, give the house a check over and address anything that needs to be addressed, and then we know when we leave the beds are made and the place looks great, so that the owner comes home to their home feeling like they're home.
And we're able to go about our routine as we normally would. What about you? What are some of the tips that you've got that you can share? Obviously, for those of you who are seasoned house sitters watching this video, you've got plenty of experience that can be drawn from. Share your tips in the comments below. Let people know what it is that you've learned that you can do to improve your routine. We're living our life with no anchor, watching a magpie coming into land here before we're going to go and explore the next section of Uluru. And
you should definitely do.
see you on the next one.